Okay, welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint, where we like to talk about issues from a libertarian perspective. Your regular host, James Just, is not here today. He's out representing the party at the state fair. So if you happen to be there over the next few days, look for his table and show him a little bit of love. So I'll be filling in, and my name is Jason McPhee, and I'm also the host of the Knuckleheads of Liberty, which also appears on this channel at 5:30 on Mondays, and you can also find it at knuckleheadsofliberty.com. We have a special guest today here with us today, and he's going to be talking about problems of taxation and debt in the country, and that is W. Bruce Lee of the Phoenix Correspondents Commission. So we have him over here. And so Bruce, do you want to tell us a little bit about what the Phoenix Correspondents Commission is and what you guys do over there?
Sure, I can give you a little bit of an introduction to that. The PCC was created in 2017 as an organization to represent all 50 states. It is a 50-state government commission created by the states for the purposes of helping to realign federal and state authorities, which have become a little bit out of balance in the past many years, and speak with Congress with a singular voice, to provide educational forums for the public, and provide educational information, empowerment of state legislators.
Okay. Well, you know, so just curious, one of the things I always like to do at the beginning of an interview is find out how you came about doing this. I mean, what is it in your background that sort of drew you into this to be interested in issues of tax and debt like this, you know, that the states are dealing with?
Well, the issues of tax and debt, well, first of all, I've always had a great passion for what I call citizen ownership of our government. We're extremely fortunate here in the United States to have a situation where we actually do own our government. And oftentimes citizens simply sneer at our government and they say, oh, you guys over there, you're doing this, you're doing that. And as I talk to folks, I have to say, well, actually, if you don't like what's going on over there, let's talk to the owners. And who are the owners? And the owners are you and I. But our citizens need to be empowered and to be well organized to express that ownership in a meaningful way. So that's been a passion of mine. And national debt is not like an exciting topic to me, in the sense like, woohoo, let's talk about national debt, but it's an important topic. And so it's not something you do because it's, oh man, this is a lot of fun. You do because it has huge implications for our current freedoms and our current prosperity, and more so for our next generations.
Well, yeah, it's certainly, you know, a lot of these perspectives are lost on most people. They're just like, I guess they think these things will take care of themselves, and unfortunately they're taking care of us in a very bad way.
Well, I think a lot of people are involved in their own daily routine, you know, and because of that, they do think someone else is going to assume responsibility. To Tocqueville, back a couple hundred years ago, when he came, and he wrote about why is democracy successful in the United States. And one of the comments in his book when he came back, he said, I scarcely found an American anywhere I went that could not clearly tell you who had what responsibilities for what and when and where, etc. And that's not that way today. You know, today we don't even really educate folks in terms of civics classes and things like that. And we just assume things are going to continue as they've always continued. But if you look at history, you'll find great empires who no longer existed today. So the Brits came, the Brits left, etc. And there's no reason on God's green earth why the United States cannot be an also-ran given just a generation or so, unless we pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah, and that's the scary thing. Too many people just have too much faith in the almighty GOV, almighty government. And I think they assume that somebody's out there looking out, Big Brother is looking out for them, and unfortunately that's...
Well, you know, there's a little naivete in there.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of incentives for government to grow and the government to overstep. And so our liberties need to be jealously guarded. The best thought that was shared with me many years ago by a mentor of mine, he said it was a privilege to be born free, a responsibility to live free, and a duty to die free. Because the only reason you or I were born free is because our parents died free. So let's not take this for granted. And I do a lot of teaching in many parts of the world, and you see these pseudo-democracies all around, and they're funkified. And you see populations that are hopeless and simply manipulated by the government. And shame on us if we allow that to happen to ourselves.
Well, and that's what really too bad that so many people have let it come to that. But I guess that problem has been creeping up on us, and I guess we can see it in the form of debt and taxes is a good way that we can see the scale or scope of that problem, of how much of our liberty has been eroded. So did you want to tell us a little bit about what the scope of that problem that we're facing is?
Sure. In terms of national debt, and it's an obvious problem. It's been staring us in the face for 40, 50 years. So there's nothing like, oh, gee, we didn't know about this. And the alarm bells have been going off for a long time, and I'll share about that with you. But, our government is aware of the issues with our national debt and the implications. And so if I might, Jason, I'm going to share with you, the U.S. Senate in March 20th of this year passed a resolution, okay? And they agreed to the following. They agreed that as of January 2024, there was a $34 trillion debt that we owe, okay? That we owe $659 billion on that debt as part of interest only. All right, okay. These are big numbers.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, big numbers often to elected officials or just big numbers on a piece of paper. They have no meaning. In a few moments, I'm going to try to translate that into practical reality in layman terms of what that means.
One thing I wanted to tell our audience too is that if you lose track of these numbers that you're talking about, that Bruce is telling us about, you can go to debtclock.org and you can literally see the numbers changing and growing as the problem gets bigger. So anyways, go ahead, Bruce.
No. Well, and our Senate, U.S. Senate, did declare that as of last January, our debt as a percentage of gross domestic product was 123%. That's a significant figure. We'll talk about that more in a second. That the debt per citizen is $102,000. Congratulations, California. Congratulations, United States. You owe more money than you realize. The debt per taxpayer is $265,000.
And that number sounds like just fantasy land. I mean, I think most people probably couldn't even imagine having $200,000 in their bank account, let alone the fact that they just owe it.
Yeah.
And how did it get there?
Yeah. Well, others took out a loan on your behalf.
Yeah.
And so, again, shame on the owners for not minding the store, so to speak. In fiscal year 2023, the federal government brought in $4.4 trillion. They spent $6.1 trillion, giving a one-year deficit of $1.7 trillion. The Senate has failed to call regular order in 2024 or for many years prior to that. Social Security and Medicare will be depleted by 2031, those trust funds. That's a handful of years away. And they're looking at potentially cutting back benefits by 21% to everybody. There are some solutions, but time's a wasting. They also recognize that $8 trillion in federal debt is owned by individuals not located in the United States, and $1.5 trillion is owned by individuals in China. And indeed, the lender is the master over the borrower in that regard. China and the European Union are looking at alternate currency systems. We're being squeezed from many sides.
Well, you know, and you did talk about this aspect of spending roughly $6 trillion and being well over $1 trillion or so over what we were collecting in taxes. And a lot of people will say, hey, why don't we just tax the rich? But if you wiped out all the billionaires that we have, because I don't even think we have any trillionaires. So,
no, I don't think so.
Exactly. So if you just wiped out all the billionaires to pay off your taxes, you wouldn't even probably be able to pay it off for 1 year, I imagine.
Yeah, and again, that's for 1 year.
Yeah.
And the economic consequences of having those individuals not investing their money into the U.S. economy, I mean, there are implications there. The spending on interest will exceed all entire spending on our national defense in 2024. And a few final things here from this resolution of the Senate, recognizing that as early as 2018, Secretary of Defense Mattis said, any nation that can't keep its fiscal house in order eventually cannot maintain its military power. Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, our continued plunge into debt is unsustainable and represents a dire threat to our future and our national security. And it goes on. And then the Senate says, yeah, you know, the debt is the single greatest threat to our national security. The deficits are unsustainable, irresponsible, and reckless. And restoring regular order in our budget process is absolutely essential. So it's not that people are like, duh, or dumb, or hey, what the hell's going on? Pardon my French. Everyone's very aware of it.
Yeah.
Yet, there's been no solutions provided.
Well, you know, and it's funny because you talk about defense and how just the interest is going to be more than defense spending. So, and if you really think about, look historically at what happened to a lot of other great empires over time, the debt is really what caused a lot of these empires to collapse. I mean, if you look at the Roman Empire, by the time they were done with all their expansive military and everything else, eventually they were going from sound money to essentially pot metal coins that, you know, just devaluing their currency. And I think you can see this as well here in the United States, where I know Ron Paul likes to talk a lot about a silver dollar back in 1920 being worth what was $1 today. That silver is worth 20-something dollars today, and it was worth $1 back then. Well, if you kept it as fiat currency, it would still be worth, you would have lost $20 worth of value in that piece of metal, essentially. So it just shows you the devaluation of the currency that seems to always happen with these empires. And
it has plagued the Ottoman Empire, and we'll go into some details about that. But there's some theses around that that's a precursor to national destruction. Yeah. And so, hey, heads up, historians. You know, let's learn from the past. But let me put this in practical terms. Okay, so those are some big number terms, but in practical terms, as you said, the national debt exceeds $34 trillion. That is greater than the economies of China, Germany, Japan, India, and the United Kingdom combined. Right. That is, as I mentioned, $259,000 per household, $101,000 per person. If every household in the United States contributed $1,000 a month for 22 years, then maybe we'd start to pay down that debt. Wow. I mean, now that's starting to go, okay, I can fathom that. What if I had to pay an extra $1,000 every month myself? $34 trillion will buy a public 4-year education for every high school graduate for the next 106 years.
Don't tell the teachers union, because they might figure out a way to get some raises out of that.
Within 10 years, we'll spend more on just interest than we do on research and development, infrastructure, and education combined. Our $2 billion a day interest payments, and as of December this last year, 2023, our debt to gross domestic product ratio is 121.6%. And I'll remember that factoid because it will show up a slide here in a little bit about historically where we come. So frankly, as a friend of mine puts it, the former U.S. Comptroller and Board of Social Security trustee, Dave Walker, the debt is irresponsible, it is unethical, and it is immoral, what we're doing.
And what you seem to be describing almost sounds like an existential threat to our country.
Oh.
And if, quite frankly, if you look at the debt over time, and unfortunately I don't have a visual here, but you can see it looks rather like a hockey stick. Mm-hmm. And if we like to talk about hockey sticks as existential threats, it's odd that somehow our Congress cannot see that hockey stick in front of them, you know, that it's just showing this debt that's going to the moon.
And actually they can see it. I was speaking with different congressmen recently, and I'll mention that. They do know. They do see it's there. But it's a little bit like putting, you know, blinders on your eyes for a few different reasons. Now, if that graphic is available, this would be a great time to put that up, if it's available.
I don't know, does I'll kind of give a shout out to our invisible hand. If you're there, we did have a graphic of debt to GDP, but if not, we'll kind of give you a little bit of a visual.
Well, let me give you a historical. Okay.
Yeah.
So back 1794. Okay. Revolution is over, etc. And let me explain this. Okay. So debt to gross domestic product. Consider this debt to my annual income. All right. So if I make $100,000 a year, and I have $15,000 of debt, that's a 15% ratio. Okay, I can handle that. You know, people trust me in that regard. If I have a $100,000 income and my debt is $100,000 or 100% ratio, then whoa, okay. And if you go beyond that, it becomes much more serious. So back after the Civil War, we had a debt of around 24%. Again, a lot of military expenses, had to pay back France and other folks, etc., things like that. But that quickly came down, and by around 1830, it was like zero, almost. And then 1846, it bumped along, etc. And then the war between the states, or the Civil War, in the 1860s, it jumped up to around 28% GDP. Okay. And then it quickly went back down, and by 1923, we're back around like 4 or 5% ratio. World War I came along, and it jumped up to around 27%, then dropped back down to like 17%. You had the Great Depression, where it was around 40% ratio, debt to GDP. Okay, and that bumped along, and then World War II. And that was the big spike, 114%. But as I've heard it said, you know, we're betting the farm. We're fighting for the freedom of the entire free world.
Yeah.
It was all or nothing in that regard. So that was a huge spike, but only lasted a year or two. And then it quickly plummeted. So around 1976, it was like 28%. In 2001, it was like 49%. We had the Great Recession, and then all of a sudden, the past 40 years, spin, under Democratic and Republican administrations. To the point now, as I mentioned, we're at 121%. Now, frankly, third world countries operate that way. And again, I know what I speak because I've been in dozens and dozens teaching in third world countries. That's how they operate.
And I just want to break in here for a second. If you're watching this and you want to check out some of these numbers, go to our Congressional Budget Office online and search for debt to GDP. And every year they put out an annual report, and you will find this chart that we're talking. Oh, here we go. Here is
wonderful.
the chart.
Yeah.
So maybe we could get the camera on this. Okay, so there we go. So here is the World War II that he's talking about.
Yep,
so you start out at 1900, and here you have World War I, and then it drops down. You have the Great Depression, and then World War II, and that's the big spike.
Yes.
And then it drops down. And by the way, the reason this is dropping, it's not so much because we're paying everything off, it's because our productivity is getting
Yes.
so much better.
Yes.
So, but you can see that this jumps up here with the housing bubble, war in Iraq, all that stuff, and our government is literally telling us this is headed off to the stratosphere. I mean, this is a hockey stick, is what we're
Yeah.
seeing here.
Well, by 2054, it is estimated to be 172 to 200% ratio. I mean, that's insanity. Now, some people say, don't worry about it, it's okay, it'll all work out. But I wouldn't bank on that. And fortunately, there are some solutions. Now, you were talking about the Roman Empire and things of this nature. There's, Wall Street is beginning to react to this for some time now, ringing the bell. Bridgewater's Ray Dalio said the U.S. is on a precipice of a debt crisis. J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon said the issue is one of the most, quote, predictable problems to face our economy. And this is just a few months ago. But this is the law, Ferguson's law. Ferguson's law, historian Ferguson examined historical patterns of great empires. And was a quote from him. Any great power that spends more on debt service than on defense will not stay great very long. True of Habsburg Spain, true of the ancient regime in France, true of the Ottoman Empire, true of the British Empire. This law is about to be put to test by the USA beginning this very year. That was a recent quote on X.
Well, and it's funny too, because they try to tell us constantly, they try and create some reason why we shouldn't be worried about this. And it seemed to me one of the most recent things, and I hope we're not getting to a rabbit hole here, but is modern monetary theory.
Yes, I have that and this is one of the modern monetary theory is one of the opioids that Congress will use on itself, saying it's okay, don't worry about that, and we can examine that a little bit in some detail. But there are definitely implications of this credit debt crisis that we have, and one simply is that our federal credit rating is down, it's slipping down. And so if I take out I make $100,000 a year, and now my debt is 150% ratio. Okay, so I say, hey, give me a little bit more, please. Give me a little bit more. I got to pay my car payment, whatever it might be. And they say, well, if I'm going to loan you any more money, it's going to cost a little bit more. And so we are being downgraded. In August of 23, Fitch downgraded the U.S. long-term credit from AAA to from AAA to AA plus. Based upon expected fiscal deterioration and growing national debt. In November of 23, Moody's lowered its outlook on U.S. credit from stable to negative, and citing the federal debt crisis. And Standard & Poor's downgraded us as early as 2011. So for the debt we do have, we're going to have to be paying more and more on that. Even the International Monetary Fund, as of April this year, issued a warning to the United States saying that and this is unusual to have this type of direct criticism, that the country's recent standout performance of advanced economies was in huge part simply based upon unsustainable fiscal policy and our debt.
Wow. That's, it's a depressing story.
Well, yeah, but it's a story that's predictable. Now, sometimes people ask me, what can I do to enhance the relationship with my friend or my spouse or this type of thing? So, well, if you never talk to your spouse, things are pretty predictable to go downhill, right? And if you really want to liven things up with your spouse, I can give you a secret. It just takes 20 seconds a day. Really? I said, well, all you have to do is, rather than just kiss your spouse on the cheek when you go off to work in the morning, is invest 20 seconds in a 20-second kiss. And I can almost guarantee you, with a 20-second kiss every morning, that's going to put some spark into your relationship. So we got to get serious about doing some rather simple things, but obvious things that we tend to ignore.
Okay. Well, you know, I guess we've talked a little bit about how we got here, and you know, I guess this is really a problem, though, of I guess that we're just not able to invest that 20 seconds every day in the KISS, I guess, right? Somehow, I guess in self-care, I guess is the best way to say it, of our finances.
Self-care, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another great thing that's happening here is this. We are losing our military status. We're losing our moral influence in the world. And now we have de-dollarization, all because of in large part because of our debt. And de-dollarization is the fact that the world's economy works on the dollar system. So the Bretton Woods Conference back in 1944, after World War II, world leaders came together and said, we need a common currency to keep us all working together, right? They said, that makes sense. They thought about different things, but the U.S. economy, the dollar made sense, and so it was established as the dominant currency. And we had a lot of gold at that time, and people had confidence in us.
And does that have a little bit to do with the whole petrodollar thing and the idea that we're kind of losing that now as well, too?
Absolutely. So here in the last year, you have China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and even Brazil saying we want to use other currencies, such as the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble.
And that sounds like a terrible place now when everybody seems to be moving away from the dollar. Unfortunately, we're at the end of this show just about here, but there will be a part 2. So Bruce is going to be on to tell us about, you know, maybe some of the solutions that are available.
Absolutely.
And a little bit of the stuff that he's working on as well. So hopefully you can come back and join us on the next Libertarian Counterpoint. Until then, stay tuned and stay free.